I want to start out by reading some quotes about silence, which is the topic of our podcast today. And I'm just going to start, and after that, we can do some talking and dive deeper into the concept. Here we go. All man's miseries derive from not being able to sit in a quiet room alone. Blaise Pascal. A fool is known by his speech, and a wise man by silence. Pythagoras. Saying nothing sometimes says the most. Emily Dickinson. Listen to silence. It has so much to say. Rumi. The monotony and solitude of a quiet life stimulates the creative mind. Albert Einstein. And another one by Albert Einstein. I think 99 times and find nothing. I stop thinking, swim in silence, and the truth comes to me. Speak only if it improves upon the silence. This one's by Mahatma Gandhi. Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know. Lao Tzu. There is greater comfort in the substance of silence than in the answer to a question, says Thomas Merton. The best cure for the body is a quiet mind. This one by Napoleon. Silence is the element in which great things fashion themselves together. Thomas Carlyle. And we end with a quote by our teacher, Sri Chinmoy. Meditation is silence, energizing and fulfilling. Silence is the eloquent expression of the inexpressible. So, just some wise words about silence, Fajan.
Profound.
What do you make of this?
Profound. There's a lot of wonderful thinkers have thought deeply about the nature of the world. And it seems like they've all come to the same conclusion that silence seems to play a much more important role than we normally give it credit for.
Yeah, because silence is much more than just not speaking.
Yeah, like the most simple level of silence is the absence of sound or speech. But the way that these people are talking about it, it tells us that there's something much deeper and more profound within the experience of silence. And so perhaps today we could dive into that experience.
Absolutely. And since we are a spiritual podcast and we meditate, I mean, meditation is all about silence.
Yeah.
Right? We quoted Sri Chinmoy last week, who said, meditation is communication with silence.
Yeah.
So I'm also interested to know, how can we let the listeners know, how can you achieve silence, like true inner silence? How do we go about that? So maybe we can talk about that as well.
Yeah. So I think let's start about looking at silence in the world, like in our human relations, in the way we deal with life, and the way we deal with all of the myriad situations we find ourselves in on a daily basis. And how could silence actually play a role in improving our experience of reality? And then from there, we can start looking at it in deeper levels, and we can start looking at some practical
Sounds good.
Practical movements towards silence. So where to start with silence? It's beginningless and endless.
Yeah, we can start with a minute of silence.
Yeah.
But I think our listeners would switch off very quickly. So
yeah. So well, let's look at the time we're living in, because what we're looking for is we're looking for timeless truths that have something to offer to people living in this particular moment. And the time we're living in at this moment is a time that is constantly calling and pulling at our attention. It's calling on us constantly to give our attention to one thing or another. With our communication technologies, I can be constantly contacted wherever I am in the world. I can constantly contact all of the people I know somewhere in the world. I'm constantly called to watch this video, to listen to this podcast, to read this news story. So I'm constantly being pulled to constantly being in communication with other people. So to offer my time, my attention, my energy to people that I know and care about and people that I'm associated with. And also I'm constantly being pulled to consume information in one form or another. And so what we want to think is, what effect is that having on us as spiritual beings, as conscious beings, as psychic beings? And what I would say is the great thinkers in the past, in particular, I was reading some great writing by Carl Jung, who was the psychoanalyst, the Swiss psychoanalyst who was around through the first half of the 20th century, and one of the greatest thinkers of all time, I would say. And he had a lot to say about silence.
Oh, right.
And so one thing that I really liked that he said about silence is silence is not a void. It is instead a fertile ground for inner transformation.
A fertile ground for inner transformation.
Yeah,
That
and
sounds very spiritual.
so this captures a lot of the things that these great thinkers that we were speaking about earlier have said. And so what I think we want to grasp the idea of is that we all have a finite amount of psychic energy. And so our psychic energy is constantly being pulled by all of those forces around us. So all of
And with psychic energy, you mean just your energy level that you feel throughout the day?
it's not your physical energy per se, but it's your ability to give your attention, your conscious awareness to anything in particular. And so every time you choose to interact with someone, every time you choose to listen to something or to watch something or to have an opinion on something, you're being pulled to use some of your psychic energy. And a good example of psychic energy is when someone walks into a room and someone has real command and control of their psychic energy. You feel this incredible energy and charisma around that person. It's the type of person who walks into a room and everyone turns around and looks at that person because there's something really powerful about someone who's learned to control and master their own psychic energy.
So that means that they garner it, they kind of exude it, or they vibrate with
They
it.
control it. They don't let it just flow out.
No leaks.
But yeah, and this is what I think is a problem that myriad people are suffering from, is this inability to maintain and control their own psychic energy. So all of the distractions and all of the temptations and all of the forces trying to steal your attention, they're taking away your psychic energy. And then the relations that you have with the people around you, often the relationships we find with the people around us, if we look at them from a highest, and this, from a spiritual point of view, very often they're relationships of convenience. They're not based on the greatest good for you and the other person in the relationship. Instead, they're relationships that are born out of familiarity, of convenience. These people are perhaps your work colleagues, so there's it's your livelihood. So you're interacting with many people in your life that perhaps you've never consciously chosen to have these people around you. And what you tend to find is over time interacting in the world that there's many people who are trying to consciously or unconsciously control you through taking and creating certain reactions from you. So a good example is someone who they'll always come to you with a drama or a disaster or some, terrible thing that's going on, or their latest tragedy or their latest problem. And they always expect you to play a particular role in their life. They expect you to provide some comfort and some validation that they're in the right and some emotional support. And if we take the view of that we're inside a drama, we're inside the cosmic play. If you think of your character being on the stage, if your character is constantly being assailed by the characters around it, asking, "Oh, do this for me, do that, come here, do this." There's no time for your character to develop their own storyline. There's no time for your character to develop their own arc of story across time, because they're too busy just dealing with all of the interactions that they're constantly being foisted upon them. And so they're not having any time of stillness or silence to actually start to dive within and look to see where their character should be going. What's their character's dreams and vision, and which is the qualities that their character needs to learn to manifest.
And when you speak about the character, do you mean like the higher self or the soul?
Exactly. So when I'm talking about the character, because the thing is, you're always going to act out some character. If someone comes and interacts with you, you're going to respond in some way. But a lot of the responses we give to the world are reactive responses. So we've had some trauma in the past, we've had something happen to us, and now we have these wounds or triggers in us. And so it may have been we felt unloved by our parents for some reason, or we felt a sense of loss or betrayal, or we felt a sense of being incomplete and not enough. And so if when people come to us and they understand our triggers and they push on those triggers, we're going to simply react in that particular way. So we're not going to consciously choose the way that we're acting in the world. Simply, we become a being that's reacting in a very emotionally driven way to all of the interactions.
I don't even think that has to do with trauma. Like, it's just like interacting with the world in general.
Yeah.
If people talk to you, you say something back, and
Yeah.
you're always acting and reacting.
Yeah, exactly. But you have to also be aware that there's some people that you're operating with in this world who are actually, for them, this is their strong suit. This is the area of mastery. And so there's people who are really powerful at emotional manipulation. They can really see, and especially if you're someone who is showing that you do not have an ability to protect your own psychic energy, there'll be people in your environment who will see that, and they'll see that as a vulnerability, and they will take advantage of you for that. So they will use you. And what you want to think in these relationships, in these unhealthy relationships with other human beings, people are not in relationship with you they're not seeing you as an end. They're seeing you as a means to get something that they want.
What's the end then?
So if they saw you as a true individual who, like a true divine being, and that they saw that your happiness and your flourishing and your well-being was also their goal, then that's a very different sort of relationship. That's a very, very healthy relationship. If you have people around you who treat you as though your happiness and well-being is as important to them as their own happiness and well-being, that's the sign that you're in a really healthy and strong relationship with these people. Whereas if you find people that treat you as though you're a means to their ends and are not concerned about your well-being,
It's like to get validation or some emotional
Yeah.
support.
Exactly. And so this is the type of person who, whenever you interact with them, it's never about you, it's always about them. So they're trying to bring you into their storyline.
Yeah.
And because what they've seen and understood on some level is that you can be a tool for them. And especially when people realize how you work and what your triggers are, then you become very predictable. And anything that becomes predictable will be used by other people as a tool. And so when we don't understand ourselves fully, and we don't understand our own triggers, and we don't understand the buttons that other people can push on us that will make us get upset or become compassionate or become emotionally invested, then if we don't understand what those things are, other people around us will start pushing those buttons for us, and they'll be getting what they want. And when they've got what they wanted, then they'll put us back on the shelf. They'll say, oh, great. Okay, thanks. I've got what I needed. And they'll walk off. And it's the type of one-sided relationship we're talking about.
Are you talking about people who are like energy vampires? It is sometimes called.
Yeah, so some people use that term, and that's a term for someone who has an unfortunate habit of taking your energy away without giving something in return.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're talking
But you
about.
feel that when somebody interacts with you, like, you feel drained, right? There's no like, if in a healthy interaction, there's always like a feeling of you're getting better from it, they're getting better from it.
Yeah.
And you feel like heightened sense of joy maybe, or good energy.
Yeah.
But after an interaction like that with somebody who really sucks your life energy, you just feel drained.
Yeah, because they're taking what they want, and as soon as they've got what they wanted, they'll say, "Great, thank you very much," and they'll leave the situation. And so it's those types of relationships that we want to be really careful about. And so we've got two things that we're looking out for here. We're looking out for the way that technology and communication is stealing away our energy.
So that is in itself is like an energy vampire.
Exactly,
not in the form of a person.
And it's that one is much more insidious, because that one you're doing it from a place of virtue, because there's an idea. So like if we look at social media, for example, like you have, your social media, and you've got your Instagram, maybe you're still on Facebook, but you've got a presence in the digital world. And so we've been told for the longest time, and it's so ingrained in so many of us through our culture, through the unconscious of our culture has pushed this idea that the way that we can prove that we are valuable and that we're lovable and that there's meaning in our life is by being always available for everyone else. So, and you see so many people that have caused so much suffering in their own life by always making themselves available for other people. And so it's like if someone messages you and you're tired, and you think, okay, I just want to, relax and I want to take some time for myself, but you feel compelled, like, oh no, I need to reply to this person. Like, And often that's coming from a really negative place, actually. It's not really that you're really truly wanting to be of service to them in that moment. But instead, what's happening is your fear of rejection, your fear of no longer being loved and needed and important in other people's lives drives you to constantly make yourself available.
Yeah, people sometimes try to make you feel guilty if you're not available. It's like, I texted you like 2 days
Yeah,
ago. You
it,
didn't
it,
answer me.
exactly. So this is the thing that we have to really watch out for, because our time, not just our time though, but although our time, I've talked about that before, that time is such an incredible wealth, and how we use that really determines the quality of our lives. But equal to that in some ways is our own psychic energy.
Mm.
If we're just letting our psychic energy just flow out, it's a finite resource on a daily basis.
Mhm.
And it seems in some way that's one of the roles I think sleep plays. Is sleep actually is the thing that restores our psychic capacities, our psychic energy. So there's some inner aspect that we process all of the experiences we had, but we also renew our psychic energy, because you can feel that when you haven't had enough sleep, you're always feeling that next day you're feeling really short on like the ability just to deal with
Yeah.
the experiences of life. And it's not just a physical thing. It's like the you don't have the bandwidth. You're running low on psychic energy.
Yes, exactly.
And so,
Yeah, and that I would say that there's also ways to get more psychic energy, to like
yes,
to increase the storage that you have. And I would
yeah,
say that spiritual disciplines and meditation in particular
yeah,
is one tool that you have to increase your psychic energy. Because it's like
yeah,
psychic energy is like also cosmic energy, right? When in meditation you can go deep within and you can invoke cosmic energy. And sometimes after a long meditation or a deep meditation, I feel so energized.
mm,
And there can be joy, peace, love. It can have different faces, this energy, but it's like a very positive energy. And I think if you have built up a meditation practice, and you do that early in the morning, then for the rest of the day, you have much more of that psychic energy. So you're less vulnerable to like people who, want to steal it from you.
yeah,
There's much more of it.
yeah,
And plus, you get the capacity to shield that.
mhm,
I feel you get a capacity to kind of guard your energy because you become more conscious of it. So
yeah,
you're more careful when you give it away.
yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, those are all really beautiful points, and they capture really what one of the great benefits of meditation
Mm,
is that it's going to do both of those things. It's going to help make us stronger and more resilient, but it's also going to develop our capacities. It's going to increase our capacities.
yeah.
And so if we think about how silence is going to um, connect in with these ideas. So we've got these two problems that we're facing when we're dealing with the world. We've got people who are misusing our energies, draining our energies, and we've got the need to always be available for other people. So both
Yeah.
of these
And,
things,
and technology kind of abuses that second one.
exactly.
So it's like things and people are
Yeah.
both kind of draining our energy.
Yeah, and what you want to think as well with your technology is that in ancient times, stress was a very short-term response. So if I lived in the plains of Africa, I would experience stress as a very acute situation. So there would be a noise in the bushes, and I think, oh my God, is it an elephant? Is it a lion? What is it? And then I see it's a warthog, and it walks across, and I realize, okay,
I'm safe.
the danger has passed. So for that moment, I had really high levels of stress and cortisol and the stress hormones, and so I'm really super aware. But then that resolves itself very quickly. In our modern world, the type of stress that we're experiencing is much more insidious because it's a much deeper, chronic, long-term experience of stress.
But we still have the same DNA.
Exactly.
So we still react. We have ancient DNA. We still
Yeah,
react the same way on dangers, but the
yeah.
dangers are like everywhere all of a sudden.
Yeah, and one of the big dangers that we face now is what would in ancient times would have been being cast out from the tribe. So being judged by the tribe. So this idea that there was always a sense of stress and danger around how you were seen and viewed by your tribe, because without your tribe, you were really a loner, and your chances of survival become vanishingly small. And now we've got problems like, for example, it's been shown that the anxiety around your inbox for your emails. because now your inbox and your emails is in some ways acting as a proxy for that fear of being judged by the tribe. And so there's always a feeling of anxiety that people have around checking their emails, because it's the exact same thing that, oh my God, what if someone emails me and I need to respond, and I can't keep them waiting. And so there's this real desire to please other people and always be available so we don't get cast out of the tribe, which is obviously a nonsensical position to take, but our body doesn't understand that. So we often see and feel this low level of anxiety. So instead of anxiety being the short-term stress response, it's this really long-term chronic thing. We're just always feeling like we're only just keeping up.
I mean, it's obvious that so many people now are suffering from burnouts.
Yeah.
Even young people, like people,
Yeah.
teenagers and
Yeah.
20-year-olds are having burnouts. I think it has to do with the technology. Like
Yeah.
that's come in like the last 15 years,
Yeah.
and it's completely changed the playing field where there's constant stimulus.
Yeah.
And our brain is just not, it's not figured out for that. It's not
No.
geared towards processing so much stimuli.
Yeah.
Like you said, it was a short danger. We could deal with it, and then
Yeah.
we had, long periods of ease and rest. And it's also been researched that stress is actually healthy if it is short-term stress,
Yeah.
like running for a train that you want to catch the train.
Yeah.
These little things that daily life offers us are actually healthy.
Yeah.
But then prolonged low stress on the long term, that's very
Yeah.
unhealthy.
Yeah.
And that's what you talked about.
Yeah.
That is something that's a real danger or challenge in our current society,
Yeah.
that we have all these modern technologies, but a very ancient body
Yeah.
to process the stimuli, and that often goes wrong there.
Yeah, and I think as well, if we look at the way that ancient people lived, it's been theorized by people who've really looked into the topic, that the amount of time that ancient hunter-gatherer people would spend working each day would be around 4 hours. So normally they would separate. The men would do certain tasks like hunting for animals, and women would be collecting berries or mosses or mushrooms and fungi and different things in different environments. But they actually would spend quite a short amount of time in comparison each day, actually, to survive.
Yeah.
And then they would spend a lot of time simply sitting around. So there was, I think, for ancient people, there was much more of an experience of silence. We would often call it, modern people would call it boredom. Like if you asked a young person now, can you imagine what it would be like to live 10,000 years ago, or 5,000 years ago, when you had no stimulation in the way that we have now? Young people would think, oh my God, that sounds so boring.
Yeah.
But what they're misunderstanding about that situation is what those people were doing was spending time communing with silence. They were sitting or spending time by themselves in a space of silence where they were not communicating with anyone. They weren't watching anything. They were simply there with the present moment. They were there with being itself. And I've got a couple of things I want to say about silence here. Um, these two ideas, I think, are really profoundly powerful. And so the first one is silence is mastery over our psychic energy. So
That's where we connect with the topic we just talked about.
Exactly. And so when we really learn to live in a place of silence, and so by silence, we're not just meaning the absence of thinking or talking. So silence is something that is living, and it's profound, and it's full of energy. It's full of potential. It's like the comment I had before by Carl Jung, that it's not a void, but it's a fertile ground for inner transformation. So silence is a space of transformation, of growth, of potential. So it's like a place of the unmanifest. And so by spending time in that space, connecting and communing with that space, it's like Albert Einstein said in that comment that he could spend all of this time thinking, and then it's really not when he's thinking that he comes up with his best ideas. It's when he's sitting in a place of silence. He's communing with silence, because you're allowing something beyond yourself, something transcendent from yourself. If you're thinking, you're using your own capacities. You're connected only with your finite resources that exist within your own thought world. And if you're communing with silence, if you're sitting in a place of silence, you're starting to commune with something far bigger than yourself, something that transcends your limited self. So, of course, connecting with that space is going to give you access to higher quality thoughts. It's going to give you access to thoughts that you could never have come up with by yourself. But if you sit in that place, you become a fit receptacle. You become the right type of vessel to receive these thoughts, because these higher thoughts, these higher revelations, we could call them, they can't come into a busy mind.
No, exactly. Albert Einstein also said, the monotony and solitude of a quiet life stimulates the creative mind.
Yeah,
So it's like creativity starts in silence. Many artists also experience that. You don't think about a song or a melody. It's not like thinking about it, or even writing a book or a poem. These things, they arise out of the silence.
yeah.
And that's where creativity starts also. So it's a very full place, silence.
That is a very cool thing, and that we're going to talk a little bit more about the fullness of silence, but we'll finish. We want to stay bound just to the human world at this point, because we don't want to branch out too far. So this one is important as well. Silence is not the absence. The absence. Silence is not the absence, but it's the amplification of being.
Who said that?
I'm not exactly sure where I came across this, but as soon as I heard it, it's one of those ideas that when you hear it, you're like, that is what I've been looking for.
That's true.
So silence is not the absence of being. It's not that there's nothing there. Instead, it's the amplification. It's the increase. It's the multiplication.
Being itself.
Yeah. So when you're operating from a place of silence, it's not that you've lost yourself. It's that you've increased yourself. You've expanded yourself. You've become something more than you were. And so for me, that is really an inspiring idea, that through silence, we have access to capacities, and we have access to the best abilities that we could ever imagine. They're not going to come just through our thinking and our constant repetitive doing. We need to create space in our life so we can connect to this deeper and more profound space through which being can express itself.
Yeah, I remember a story that was told about Ramana Maharshi, the sage, the Indian sage who lived in the 19th century, I believe.
Yes.
And he spoke about the silent mind and how he had always silence in his mind. And there was an Englishman who came to one of his lectures, and he thought he was very smart, this man. So he got up, quite proudly, and he said, "Sir, how can you be silent all the time in your mind? Because and then Ramana Maharshi answered a question of his, and then he said, "But sir, you just answered my question. So there must have been a thought in your mind." And Ramana Maharshi said, "Yes. When your question came, a thought arose, and I answered your question. And after that, there was again silence."
Yeah.
So it's like the thought just arises, the thought, whatever is necessary to answer the question. That wisdom just bubbles up from that vast silence.
Yeah.
And so the Englishman thought, well, of course you have to have thoughts, because how can you otherwise give answers? But yeah, the great sages and spiritual masters have taught us that wisdom just wells up from this source of silence.
Yeah. And what you want to see in that is such a healthy way to live.
Yeah.
It's like having the right thought at the right moment is the right way to live your life. If you can, when you're asked the right question, or you're asked in a particular situation, at that moment you trust that the right thought will appear in that open space.
Yeah, but it's very challenging, because it needs a lot of courage to trust that process, because your mind immediately starts formulating thoughts. And what should I answer? He's asking me this, and immediately your mind starts running all these programs.
Yeah.
But then to just like back off from that and to feel, I'm just going to go for silence and then answer the question.
Yeah, but if you go through your day-to-day life from a place of silence, that is such a powerful and strong place to be in, because first of all, that's going to connect you powerfully to the present moment. Because what we've talked about in the past is our thoughts are constantly building castles in the sky, or ruminating about the past and the things we should have done or could have done. And this is a saying I really like about the past now. It's we're battling ghosts that should have been buried long ago.
Very true.
And so a good example of that that I was thinking about is how many times, or how much time people have spent thinking about how a conversation should have gone, the things that they would have loved to have said.
Yes, it's called in French l'esprit de l'escalier, which means the spirit of the stairs. It's like when you walk down the stairs from your conversation, like dang, I should have said this. I should have said that.
Yeah.
It's like it comes to you when you're walking away from the conversation.
Yeah, and it's an amazing thing because you often, especially if it was like a heated conversation, often later on you're like, oh, I had a real zinger. I should have got on with this one. But what you're doing is you're fighting with the ghost.
Yeah.
It's using so much of your psychic energy.
That's right.
You're just bleeding out psychic energy like crazy
Yeah.
when you're thinking about things like
Yeah, and
that.
people do that so much, especially when they want to fall asleep. All
Yeah.
this thinking of the day and what they should have done and what they could have said and what this person said. And there's a lot of emotion sometimes attached to that.
Yes.
And just before sleep, if you bleed out all the psychic energy, it's like, wow.
Yeah, you're really putting yourself in a weak and vulnerable position. Whereas if you look at like Ramana Maharshi's position, he's like, I will think when I need to think. And the rest of the time I will be in silence, because silence is the most profound and most powerful state of being that you have access to. And most people their life is so full of sound that they've never really experienced the benefits of silence. So all of those comments that great thinkers have said in the past, they all resonate with the true capacity and power of silence. And this is really the great lesson that we're trying to impart from our own experiences. Through practicing a spiritual practice, you start to see and feel and experience the profound power of silence.
And would you say that people who suffer from burnout, if they would have more silence in their life, they could protect against burnout?
Yeah, exactly. Because I think burnout is very much that state of becoming compromised in your own psychic energy.
Constantly having no psychic energy and not being replenished enough.
No, and you'll go to a doctor and they'll do this test and that test and they'll run your bloods and they'll try this and that, and it never does anything because they're looking in the wrong place.
Right.
It's
not a physical condition.
It's not there's a lot of people who are suffering from this state, and it's come about from the inability to protect their own psychic energy
and to replenish it.
Replenish it, exactly.
Yeah. So you just said something that silence is how to protect or how to safeguard your psychic energy.
Yeah, silence is mastery over our psychic energy.
So explain that.
So when we learn to exist in a place of silence, we're holding our psychic energy inward rather than allowing it just to be flowing out to all and sundry. We are in a position we will consciously choose who we offer our psychic energy to. And so you may worry like, oh my goodness, isn't that a little bit selfish though? Like you should be giving to everyone. But a wise person would not give the same quality of time and energy to every single person they meet. It's like the biblical saying, do not cast pearls in front of swine. It's like swine will not appreciate the beauty of a pearl. And it's the same with all of us. We all have this finite resource of psychic energy. And we want to use it in a way that aligns with who we are, but it is also valuing properly the situations and the people we're spending time with. And so when we choose to use our psychic energy more wisely, suddenly we become much, much more powerful in the world.
But what do you do with people who come to you, these energy vampires, and who start to kind of like wanting your energy because they maybe see that you have a lot of it.
So this is really the great secret. The thing that energy vampires, or for people who are wanting to use you as a means to their ends, they're trying to push a button on you. And if they start pushing the button, they start pushing some emotional button and hope to get some trigger. And you've become somewhat predictable. So they think, oh yeah, if ever I need some validation or I need some kindness or I need some support, I can come to this person. And I start pushing the button and then it always comes. If they come to you at some point and you remain in silence, you don't immediately just give away all of your wealth. They suddenly start to, wow, what's gotten into you?
The button doesn't work anymore.
What's wrong with you? And they start blaming you. And when you see this happening, and then if you find these people starting to criticize and attack you, you start to realize that what they were interested in was not you, but it was like what they could get from you, what they could take from you, what they could, pull out from you. That's what they were interested in. And you start to see that they really never valued for who you were, like the depth and complexity of who you were. That was really not the thing they were looking for. They were wanting what you could give them. Yeah. And so when you start to take that moment of silence, so this is something that we touched on in one of the earlier episodes, is that one of the great powers of meditation is it creates a small fraction of space in your life. So instead of immediately being reactive to a situation, it gives you a moment of pause where you see what's happening and then you have the ability to make a choice. You can choose to allow that emotional response and that reactive response to play out, or you can choose instead, actually, I'm not going to play this game. And that is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, because sometimes you do want to make the choice to give, to be available, and to give
Exactly.
your compassion and empathy and your time and
Exactly.
attention.
Yeah.
But there's definitely times when you feel, no, I'm gonna
Yeah.
save it this time. I'm gonna store it. It's not worth it, this interaction.
Yeah. So yeah, this is a really powerful idea as well. When you speak, you remain in the game that is being played. And so when you're playing a social game like that, it's a game of social dynamics, and someone's trying to get something, they're trying to get a particular result from you. If you speak in that situation, you're still playing the game. Even if you're trying to explain, look, hey, look, I'm trying to change my life in some way, and I'm trying to do think differently, blah, 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 blah. That is still an incredibly weak position. And I always love this aphorism by Sri Chinmoy where he talked about there's two things that God doesn't want. I'm just paraphrasing this here. And that's your complaints and your explanations.
Two things that God does not want to
Yeah.
hear from you. Yeah.
Yeah, your complaints and your explanations.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think this works on every single level. Like, I don't want to hear your complaints, but I also don't want to hear your explanations. Neither of them are.
So should you just be a stone Buddha and just not reply?
Yeah. So when you sit in your own silence, you've changed the game that you're
Yeah.
playing.
I think people feel that already. Like
Yeah.
when they approach you, there's an energy field there, and they feel
Yeah.
like, ooh, this person has a strength, or I can't just go there and push all these buttons.
Yeah, exactly. It's a thing because the thing is, you're playing an unspoken game already. So the game that they're playing is an unspoken game. They're coming and trying to take your psychic energy in some way. And when you start defending yourself, they immediately feel that on a subtle and psychic level. And so that as soon as you hold yourself in a space of silence, because silence, as we said, it's not just the absence of words. It's the foundation of where you're coming from. So you can still speak to someone, but if you're not allowing yourself the emotions to take control, the emotions and your psychic energy to all pour out, if you hold yourself in an inner state of silence and communicate with them and be pleasant and be kind, but they start to realize that they can't use you. They can't use you to get what they want. And that really takes away people's power over you. And that's what you want to think. Do you want to go through life and in the world constantly being used by other people? They'll be pushing you this way and pushing you that way. They'll be getting this emotional response. They'll be getting that emotional response. Or do you want to walk through the world where you are becoming a creator? Because before that, you're a reactor. You're just simply reacting to this situation and that situation. And most people I know exactly what that feels like. And they feel just drained. They feel exhausted. They feel burnt out. They just feel like, I'm just on a hamster wheel. I'm never getting anywhere in life. Whereas as soon as you start to take control of your own inner silence and you start to operate from that place of inner silence, suddenly you become a creator in the world.
So is silence, is it synonymous with peace?
In some ways, yes. Like, I think at its deepest level, I think silence even transcends peace. So I think silence is one of, if not the fundamental state of being for a fully integrated human being. So if I look at someone like that I really admire, like Sri Chinmoy seemed to have a profound inner silence. And he could connect with it at any moment. He could choose to be jovial. He could choose to be very engaging. But on a moment's notice, he would be completely centered in this deep, profound, transcendent.
And you could feel that.
Exactly.
I've been in the room with Sri Chinmoy or like when he walked in.
Yeah.
And this presence walks in. It's
Yeah.
tremendous presence, and you feel silence, peace, love. They're all emanating from him.
So I think the fundamental state of that is silence.
Mm.
And with that idea that silence is mastery over our psychic energy. And so if you have the ability to contain and control your own psychic energy, you can increase that, you can build it up. And that's that person. That's the person who walks into the room and everyone notices. Everyone feels a change in the atmosphere. Everyone feels a change in the consciousness in the space, because someone who's walked in who is so in control of their own energies that it's a profoundly different person than anyone else you meet. You don't meet people like that walking down the street. Yeah. If you feel someone who can step onto a subway carriage here in New York and change the feeling for everyone in the entire subway carriage, that's not this type of people you ordinarily meet.
Exactly.
So that is really what we are aiming for, is learning to master that energy, and that comes from that space of silence. So doing your practice on a daily basis, so taking time for your practice, because your practice on a daily basis is your time of communing with silence.
Yeah.
So when we talk about
That's why you practice silence.
Yeah.
Like, silence is difficult to achieve. You have to really
Exactly.
practice it. So that's where meditation starts.
So I was talking to you a couple of days ago, and you gave this a really great impersonation of what the beginning stages of silence are like through the practice of meditation.
I did.
And so you were showing how in the beginning the voice of the mind is very strong.
Oh, yes.
Can you tell us a little bit?
Oh, this is actually from a friend of mine,
Yeah.
Shashir is a member of our community, a really great Canadian friend. And he used to describe, like, when you were sitting down for the first time to meditate in the beginning, your mind is full of these thoughts, and they're quite loud.
Yeah.
You know, and it can be a thought of your mom's birthday.
Yeah.
And your mind will be, it's your mom's birthday next week. What are you going to buy her? And you're like, oh my God, that's true. And you start to rummage through all the gifts that you could buy to her and start shopping around. And, you know, before you know it, you're on this whole train of thought. And then when you go deeper into your meditation and you practice and practice and practice, the thoughts lose their strength. So instead of like shouting at you from the top of their, you know, their capacity, like, it's more like you're sitting down to meditate and the same thought can come, but it's more like, hey, it's your mom's birthday next week. What are you going to buy? You know, it's very faint, and you can actually quite easily ignore it. But before that, the thoughts are so, you know, physical and visceral almost. They cannot be denied. And that's what I've heard from a lot of people who are starting their meditation journey in my own meditation classes, that in the beginning, it's so hard. They said, like, wow, I'm just battling with all these thoughts. And I say, yeah, that's actually, everybody does. That's what you should do. Like, it's natural to have so many thoughts and to have it being very unpleasant and uncomfortable. Like, the beginning is quite hard, but that's where the continuation, like doing something consistently over time, brings success in any sphere of life. But I would say nowhere more than with meditation. Like, you have to be consistent over a long period of time. And then these processes, the thoughts become less powerful. You get more into, you're drawn more deeper into your own inner silence. And then, you know, your physical, your psychic energy stores are replenished and they're full, and you experience peace and joy, and you just become such a more rounded and fulfilled being. But I thought that was a very apt description of how, you know, your mind's voice, you know, just becomes so much more lower and less powerful over time.
Yeah, it becomes very, very quiet.
Silence speaks quietly. Wasn't that a quote that you looked?
Yeah, Sri Chinmoy said, silence speaks. It speaks very, very quietly.
Lovely. But when silence speaks, like, what do you think he meant by that?
So that's a very good question. And so I've got something to say about that. So my heart talks in silence. And so in some way, I think we could start to create a separation between the world of sound and the world of silence being the same as the space between being in our minds and experiencing reality through the space of our mind, and compared to experiencing reality through the heart. And so I think if we learn to really sit inside ourselves and enter into deep silence, naturally we find ourselves connecting into our heart, because our heart is the part of our being that speaks and communicates to us in silence. And so, like you said, the mind communicates to us in the language we speak. It speaks very loudly.
It's like the language of sound.
Exactly. And so as it becomes more calm and we start to develop some peace and tranquility, it starts to become more quiet and quieter and quieter. And at some point, I think it becomes quiet enough that we start to be able to listen to the language of the heart and the heart speaking, because the heart speaks in silence. So one of the early episodes, we talked about listening to the voice of the soul or the heart. And I was likening it to as though we had some threads or strings running through our being and through the heart. And that when I feel the heart, it's often pointing me in a direction. I start to feel this like very subtle breeze, like, you know, just playing against these strings in my heart. And it's just nudging, it's just very gently,
it's whispering
that this is the way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I think that there's something really profound about that relationship between the heart and silence. That the heart is never going to speak to us in that same way that the mind speaks to us. That conversation that the mind's constantly having. So yeah. So
have we finished the human part?
The human part. Oh, there's so many interesting things about silence. So I just have to say this as well, because I got a couple of comments from Carl Jung, and some of them are just so deeply profound and so deeply connected with the spiritual traditions of the world, the ancient spiritual traditions. He said, "You do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious."
By making the darkness conscious. What
Yeah,
does it
so
mean?
illumining the darkness
Oh, yes.
is what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
So instead of imagining the light, and Sri Chinmoy actually used the same metaphor, and he said sometimes if you want to get rid of the darkness, all you need to send in is the right person, the electrician, and just turn the light on,
Yeah.
and suddenly the darkness is banished.
Yeah, yeah.
And so there's something about our nature. And I think that ties through to what we were talking about last week with imperfections. And so the idea that imperfections, they grow out of ignorance. That's the root
Yep.
cause of all of the imperfections in the
Yep.
world is ignorance.
Yep.
And so ignorance or imperfections, they're clouding our vision of reality. They're clouding our vision of the world. So we're not seeing the world as it is. It's being covered by these imperfections and this ignorance. And spirituality, what we're aiming through spirituality, it's the path of attempting to see the world clearly as it is.
Yeah.
And so what we need to do that is we need to bring that light into our being that's going to illumine all of the darkness. And so that doesn't mean we need to focus on the darkness. We can focus on the light, but just by imagining the light, it's not going to immediately do that. We have to consciously bring light into ourselves. And the more light we can bring into ourselves, the more we start to reveal the unseen, the unconscious, the darkness within us.
How do we do that? How do we bring light into ourselves?
So I think it's all that time. It's all time and intention spent communing with the silence.
So again, the spiritual practice.
The spiritual practice. So that's like I would say I had the great blessing to have visited some of the spaces that were inhabited by God realized masters, India and then here in America. And the one commonality you feel is that what happened in this space, that someone entered in a highly elevated state of consciousness in the space. There was some feeling of the consciousness being really transcendently beautiful and elevated. And all they did was simply try to remain in that state of consciousness as long as they possibly could. And on the journey there, you're gonna get to that height and you're gonna fall down, and you're gonna get to that height and you're gonna fall down. And it's that idea of self-transcendence, that my achievement today becomes the starting point for my practice tomorrow. So it's that constant aspiration to grow into something more than we are today.
And at some point, the state becomes permanent, which is when we speak about realization,
Yeah.
self-realization or God realization. You never fall from that state. You're always one with God. You're flooded with, there's an infinite amount of light, peace, and bliss that is constantly flowing through you. And there's also this deep, deep, profound silence. And you have a free access to that source. It's like you can never, the mind it no longer has any power over you.
Yeah. And it's amazing that there is that point that you cross over. And we talk about that lowest level of, like, even when we're playing the game, the human game or the spiritual game, and we're aiming for some transcendent state, there's levels within that. And so there's some level of realization where you wake up to the true nature. You realize the true nature of reality.
Yeah.
And from there, you will never forget that again.
Yes, exactly.
And so, but that simply becomes the beginning for a continuing journey.
Sri Chinmoy very poetically talked about realization as a tree.
Yeah.
And he said some people sit at the foot of the tree. So like they're just happy, just touching the foot of the tree and sitting there. But some people want to climb up the tree, and then you have all these branches. You can climb very high into the realization tree. And then the really highest masters, which we call the avatars, they're really at the topmost branches of the reality tree. And they kind of see the whole tree and have mastery over all the branches. And, they can guide the whole humanity in the journey towards it.
Yeah, and they can take some mangoes and drop them down.
Exactly.
People down at
they
the bottom
can
of the
pluck
tree.
the most delicious fruits, which are in the topmost branches, and share them with the world.
Yeah.
With seekers.
So one more thing I want to say about silence. So this is really key, this idea here. So if you're going to take something away, take this away. Okay. So when we learn to operate from a place of silence, we stop reacting to the world. So we're no longer being pushed and pulled. We're able to consciously use our psychic energy to move in directions we want. And if we're playing the spiritual game, we're going to use that energy to move towards our own realization, let's say. But what happens when you stop reacting to the world is you begin to observe, you begin to see things more clearly than you did before.
Hmm.
And so you start to see patterns existing around you. So when you're caught simply in the game of reacting to situations as they unfold in front of you, you're not seeing the patterns as they happen again and again and again. And very often people standing outside, they'll recognize the patterns that are happening in your life or in your relationships with the people.
Yeah, it's interesting that very often people who are outside of you can judge you much more
Yeah.
clearly than you can judge yourself.
Yeah.
They know things about you much more deeply or clearly
Yeah.
than you do yourself.
Yeah, because they can see the patterns much more easily. But because you're caught up in the experience of experiencing the feelings and the emotions, you're not seeing the patterns.
Yeah.
So by starting from that place of silence, from creating that silence and operating from that place of silence, you start to no longer just simply react to the world. You start to observe and see the world as it truly is. And then you start to recognize patterns. You start to recognize the people that you gravitate towards, and you start to realize the people that you need to move away from. So you start to make wise decisions in the world. And so that is the process of starting to see what is unseen in your life. So when we talked last week about the imperfections, it was like all of those qualities, whether it was envy, or it was acedia, or it was vainglory, or
Yeah,
it was pride,
watch the last episode, people, if you're
and all
totally nonplussed about these words.
all interesting things.
They're all there.
But those are all unseen to the people experiencing them.
Mm-hmm.
So the person who is living out those cardinal sins and is caught by them, they can't see that that's what's happening. So people are not consciously saying, well, perhaps there are some people, but most people are not consciously saying, every day I want to go out and live from a place of, imperfection and delusion about the world. Most people think that they're seeing the world as it is, but that's coming from the place of silence, having that space, creating that space in your life where you're no longer simply reacting, and you can start to observe and see the world, and you start to see the patterns, and then suddenly things that have been there all along, but they were invisible to you, they start to become seen. So we're bringing things from the unseen into the seen.
Yeah, and I would say the good news is that it doesn't have to take very long to get there.
No.
So when I ask people who do meditation classes, like they often tell me after 3 or 4 weeks already, they have this feeling that they can take one step back
Yeah.
and have an observing view of reality.
Yeah.
And they stop reacting. And that
Yeah.
happens already after 3 weeks of daily meditations.
Yeah.
And concentrations.
Yeah.
I would say also concentration is very important in that.
Yeah.
When you focus on one point, make your mind very focused.
Yeah.
It's the beginning of quieting and making the mind more tranquil. Because only then you can enter the deeper layers of meditation. The mind has to first be made tranquil and quiet. But yeah, it's interesting that does not have to take weeks and months and years. It can be done in a matter of a few weeks with dedicated effort.
Yeah. Totally. And I think most people, they do feel that that's one of the first steps. They start to
Yes.
feel that there's a
Yeah.
little bit more peace, a little bit more silence inside them. And they start to feel
They're not as impulsive. That's what people
Yeah.
tell me. They're not as
Yeah.
impulsive, which is the thing you
Yeah.
talked about. They
So
don't react.
Yeah, they're not immediately reacting to the world.
And that's a great takeaway. Like for many people, that's a huge eye opener. It's like, wow, I can be like that.
Yeah, and that's because you see people who operate like that, and you think somehow they're a different type of person than you. It's like people have this kind of like deterministic mindset, like, oh, well, obviously he's this sort of person and I'm this sort of person. And it's very often that he was maybe exactly like you were 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And he's actually taken some steps and put some of his psychic energy pointing in the direction of trying to grow and transform them himself. And then you see, wow, like I could actually do that myself.
Right.
So with silence in the world as well, I want to talk about a couple of other things. So when you start to come from a place of silence and you start to choose when you make yourself available and you start to use your energy wisely, people suddenly start to value your time and attention far, far more than they did before. So if something is always available, its value is very, very low. And if something you choose to become more conscious and aware in your attention that you give to the world and people around you, suddenly people start to see a tremendous value in it. And so that's an amazing thing because it's starting to value yourself properly. So you're starting to value, instead of just giving away your attention willy-nilly to every man on the street, you're starting to be conscious and aware with the time that you're giving to people and to different opportunities in different situations. So that's a really powerful.
Yeah, people say often about very influential or so-called great people.
Yeah.
Like, oh, their time is so valuable.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking the time
Yeah.
to see me.
Yeah.
Somehow, they feel that these people have achieved something in their
Yeah.
life, something valuable, and
Yeah.
then time becomes very valuable. Like you
Yeah.
say, it's like these people are not always available.
And then the thing is as well, like people who know how to use their psychic energy well, they can give you very little of it, but it feels incredibly powerful and significant. So a good example, I know the gentleman who was the head of the Ironman organization in the Southern Hemisphere, and I've worked together with him at different events, like ultra marathons, and he's a guy that has got so much responsibility. Like he helps put on all of the Ironman races, which is, from running to triathlon to trail running. So like mountain biking, a whole bunch of different events. And so there's this tremendous amount of responsibility on his shoulders. But if you ever meet him at an event, like he makes himself available at the event. And so he'll walk around, and if you see him, he'll take a minute or two to talk to you, and he gives you his full attention at that moment where there's so many other things going on. And there's this, his time seems even more, it like magnifies the value of his time.
Yeah.
And I remember taking a moment and having a chat with him at an event that I'd done, and he just gave me a couple of minutes, and just really wanted to know how I was feeling, like how I was enjoying the experience, and how I was seeing things. And I always saw that, wow, that's such an incredible power he had to be very intentional with his attention, and to really, like, he obviously wasn't doing that all day, but he would take the time to come out and connect with people and show he was there.
Yeah.
And make people feel seen and heard.
Yeah.
And valued.
Yeah, that's like a master of his psychic energies, seems like.
Yeah, it was a powerful thing.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. So your time and your attention becomes more valuable. People value your attention more when you learn to control it yourself. The second thing is, like, if we start to look in the world, if we look at the world, the relationship between silence and sound. We're so obsessed with the world of sound, and we totally undervalue the world of silence. And so, for example, if we're giving a presentation, if we can learn to become comfortable with silence, and we can learn to use silence in our presentation, it actually becomes such an incredibly powerful tool. And if you see someone who is an amazing presenter, their use of silence in their presentations is almost unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I have a very good friend who works in the business and the finance world, and he does a lot of really high level negotiations. And these are often negotiations involving large sums of money, and there's a lot of potential risks. And one of the things he says he does is he'll simply sit there in silence. So when people offer him, this is what we want, this is the deal, he'll just sit there, and he'll sit there and he'll sit there until it becomes so uncomfortable for the other person, because in that moment he's acting as a mirror to the other person, and they start to see the lack of silence that exists within them, all of their thoughts and their worries and their stresses, and they start talking again. And they say, oh, well, okay, maybe and so it's actually an incredibly powerful strategy to use in the world if you can master the game.
It's a great negotiation tactic.
Yeah, if you can just sit there and just be there with that silence, comfortable, because if you can center yourself in silence, you can stay in that place for a really long time. And it starts reflecting back the lack of silence in the people around you. If they're sitting
they will
there,
feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, they start to feel uncomfortable, and all their thoughts start like running around like crazy. At some point,
did I make a wrong deal?
At some point, they just blurt things out, and it shows that they're lacking in silence. And so that was another great example where I saw the practice of silence in the world. And then if we want to think about another area we see the power of silence is in music. And so when people think about music, they often think about the notes that are being played and the combination of notes. But what really makes music is the space between the notes. It's like I through my music store, I've played a lot of percussion and different percussion instruments, and I've seen some of the world's best ethnic percussionists, people who play Middle Eastern instruments or African instruments, and you often see these young guys who get into these instruments. For example, the darbuka from the Middle East. And so you see these young guys from Turkey or the Middle East, and they're absolute shredders on this instrument. They can play so fast, and their fingers, they have so much dexterity and skill in their hands. But when you listen to it, these really, really technically proficient players, they start to lose the essence of the music. They start to lose the sense of the groove that should be there. And you hear someone who has actually gone through that journey of mastery and has really mastered that instrument. And often they're happier to play a lot more openness. They leave a lot more space or a lot more silence.
Yeah, they're not showing off as much.
Yeah, exactly. So you see that often with people, who have less confidence and are more insecure, that they really fear being in a space of silence. And so they try and fill up with the silence with words, or a musician. You just want to play as many notes as possible, and you're kind of hiding behind the sound. But a real master of playing any game is someone who has a relationship with silence and allows them to be comfortable with silence.
Yeah.
So.
Did you want to speak about silence in a spiritual way as well?
Yeah. So just before we go into that, so what we've talked about before, which I will come back to, is I think if something is going to be transcendently true and real, so for something to be truly beyond any one person's experience, for it to be true for now, in the future, and in the past, so something which I'd call like a transcendent truth. You need different people to be able to find their way to that same thing via different pathways. So if only one person has come to a truth and they went one particular way, and that's the only person who's ever discovered that truth before, you have to question, well, maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But if you find that there's an idea that people have come to from 50 different directions, and they've all come to that same consensus, that silence is golden, that silence is powerful, that silence is transcendent, that silence has access to knowledge and wisdom, then I think you start to realize that there is a truth here that goes beyond any particular time and place. And so that was so wonderful how you had such a range of different thinkers that you read out quotes from. All of those people are pointing to this idea of silence. And the fact that we can get there from the point of view of Carl Jung and Sri Chinmoy and Mahatma Gandhi and Albert Einstein, and all of these people are pointing towards this idea. I think that's something that you want to remember, that these things are not common. There's not an infinite number of things that are transcendently true and real in the world. So the power of silence is one of those things. So I think keep that in mind, because that's something worth knowing. Yeah. And then the other thing I want to think, like, if something's real, I want to see it reflected in the world around me. So if it's truly real, so the idea of the power of silence, if it's only visible in one domain, then I would start to question, like, well, okay, is it truly a transcendently real thing? But the fact we can see that it works in the business world, we can see it works in music, we can see it works in public presenting, we can see it works in your relationships with your friends, you can see it works in your relationship with your families, and you can see it works in your relationship with yourself. That's like, okay, that's really cool.
There's something, yeah.
It's operating on all of these different levels. And then what even makes it more real is when you start to see it reflected in Mother Nature around us.
Mm.
And so I'm not sure if you've come across this idea, that there was this problem that came up in, I think the quantum physicists discovered it first of all, and they call it the vacuum catastrophe.
Ah.
And so have you heard of the vacuum catastrophe?
I have not. Please enlighten me.
So we live in a world where it seems like there's two states of being. There's matter, and then there's vacuum. So there's the void, the absence of matter.
Yeah.
And so for our human mind, that seems to be how we experience the world. Like, there's either things or there's the absence of things. And so if you look out into space, you'll see things, planets and nebulas and solar systems and galaxies and black holes and suns, all of these things. And then you'll see vast, vast tracts of no things, of the vacuum. And so it was always considered that the universe, the fundamental thing was the matter. Like, that's the thing. That's the thing that matters.
Yes.
So the things that matter is the matter. And then surrounding that was nothingness. It was emptiness. It was void. It was vacuum. There was nothing there. So the problem was the quantum physicists calculated how much energy was existing in the vacuum. And so how much energy would you imagine they would find inside like 1 cubic meter of nothingness?
Yeah.
Like of vacuum.
No, I've heard people who have studied that,
Yeah.
and there's like an unbelievable amount of energy.
Yeah, exactly. So this is what they call the vacuum catastrophe, was when they realized the density of energy that existed inside the vacuum. And it's like,
But what's the answer? Like, how much?
what on earth does that mean? And so like they compare that. So there's two ways of looking at the universe. There's the quantum way and there's the astronomical way. And the astronomical model, they have some value of how much energy should be in the vacuum. The quantum model is like 120 orders of magnitude higher. So according to the quantum view of the world, each square or each cubic meter of space has enough energy inside it that we could boil all of the oceans on the earth.
I love that.
So
Very visible.
So it's like, what sort of universe are we living in? So inside the silence, so I'm likening the vacuum to silence.
Yeah.
Because it's the same way that in silence we see, it's the absence of things.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the absence of things.
It's not
The vacuum is the absence of things. So these two
Yeah.
things, there's a connection between
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
They're both the absence of all things. And inside the vacuum is this infinitely dense potentiality. And it's the same thing for me. Silence is how we experience the vacuum. It's how we experience this. It's we're experiencing this infinitely dense potentiality. And so if we really want to find real energy to drive ourselves forward and transform our lives and master the game of life, we don't find it in the world of sound. Like all the energy we're looking for in the universe, we're looking for it in things, and we're getting worried like, oh my God, we're going to run out of energy because we're, running out of oil and this. So we're looking in the matter. But if we could start to see that there was this infinite amount of energy in the absence of matter, then that would solve all of our problems. And that's what people are talking about. It's called 0-point energy.
Yeah, I've heard about that. I mean, many scientists or fringe scientists or people who are personal researchers have claimed that they can get energy from the vacuum. And wasn't Nikola Tesla one of them?
So I mean, Nikola Tesla did all sorts of marvelous
Wouldn't
things.
put it past him.
And what it does, this is also really fascinating, that in some ways, the vacuum energy or the 0-point energy, it brings ether back into science. Because ether was one of the elements that we removed many years ago. But now, with our sensitivity of our measurement devices, we're starting to pick it up again. And we're like, oh no, it's that ether that we got rid of all those centuries ago. We have to call it a different name.
Back with a vengeance.
So that's...
We can call it 0-point energy.
Yeah. And so I think that's something else to note, that I see it reflected as well in the physical universe. Right. That inside silence, inside the void, inside the vacuum, there's infinite potentiality.
Love it.
So all of those things are pointing me towards this idea that silence is golden and that it's going to transform everything.
Exactly.
So let's now, as you said, we'll talk a little bit about how Sri Chinmoy viewed silence, because I think probably Sri Chinmoy has written more on silence than any man alive.
Yeah, if you punch in, like we have a website, srichinmoylibrary.com, where you can study a lot of Sri Chinmoy's writings. And there's a search function there. And if you type in silence, there's pages and pages and pages.
Yeah, I think came up with 130 pages of writings.
From his poetry, from his lectures. Yeah.
So I've got a couple of things here that I like. This is a simple aphorism. Silence I love. Silence conquers, silence transforms. So it's all of these things. It's like creating a relationship of love with that space of silence. Yeah. And then silence conquering our own imperfections and our own ignorance, and then silence transforming. It's like
that's the same thing that Jung said, right? Was it Jung that you quoted about silence transforms? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Can I hit you with one? Because I have fun for you.
Please.
I love this one by Sri Chinmoy. Silence is the fullness of my thought. Silence is the light of my inner understanding. Silence is the voice of my soul. In my silence is the breath of my reality's life.
Beautiful.
Yeah, right? And very deep and poetic.
Yeah, very poetic. And I know you yourself in your own life
I like to dabble a little bit in poetry.
Exactly. And so it's really great to see as well which ideas and the way the ideas being framed in a certain way capture different people's attention. Yeah. Because I tend to look for for example, when Sri Chinmoy writes about things, I'm looking for it when it captures the truth in a way that really resonates easily with me. Like it fits in with my picture of the world. Yeah. And it fills in some of the blanks that I'm not seeing. Okay. And the same for you, the way you see the world and the way your love of poetry and the imagery that's involved. Yeah. It's like these types of poems capture that idea for you in a way that resonates with you.
Yeah,
Makes it
that's a
clear.
great thing about such a big body of work that's Richard left behind. That
Yeah.
there's so much to resonate with. There's something for every different approach and
Yeah.
sensitivity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is another more practical one. So when you meditate and go deep within, you enter into the realm of silence, real silence. In this silence, reality is growing. But when you are in deep silence, real silence, spiritual silence, there you will also see truth is growing, love is growing, beauty is growing. Everything is growing and flowing. In real silence, reality is growing in different forms and shapes.
Yes, I actually wrote that down myself.
Yeah.
Selected that one.
Oh, good. Because for me, that captures exactly what we're talking about. That inside silence, it's not an emptiness. It's not an absence.
Yes.
It's an
And things are growing there, which is an interesting thing. It's like a seed. Things are there in seed form, and they're growing and they're blossoming. So it's constantly dynamic.
Yeah, it's incredibly dynamic, and
Yeah.
that's a really interesting thing. Like that idea that their truth is growing, love is growing, beauty is growing, everything is growing and flowing. So there's a sense of movement and potentiality, and whatever it is that you need in your life, you're going to find it through that silence. You're not going to find it through your mind. You're not going to find what you're looking for out there in the world. Instead, this is one of these great paradoxes we're talking about, where
everything is available nowadays.
Yeah,
on YouTube.
Yeah,
or wherever you want to find it.
Exactly. We think
Google.
what we're looking for is outside of us. We think it's out there in the world, that we need to go out and find what we're looking for. Whereas truly everything we're looking for is simply inside the silence of our own hearts. And if we can spend time communing with that, all the experiences that we're looking for.
That's a real challenge for young people, because they're so caught up in the digital world and the world of content. I mean, you and me are lucky enough. I feel lucky enough to grow up in a kind of technologically very
barren
and there was no social media, there was no real digitals, omnipresence as there is now. And in my childhood, I was just playing outside all the time, and there was a lot of moments where I was quote unquote bored. And boredom is so, it's so useful. And my creativity starts.
My mum would say, if I said, well, I'm bored, and she's like, good, we'll be bored.
Exactly. It's the best advice. But nowadays, boredom, I don't think it exists anymore.
It's a crime.
Yeah.
It's actually a hate crime. If you make someone else bored, it's like, this is a hate crime. Like, this is the sort of thing that you'll get brought before a judge for now. If you make your children suffer through boredom, that's would be considered child.
Well, I would like to say to our younger listeners, the Sigma males among us, we talked about it in earlier episodes, be bored.
Yeah.
Good. Just be bored.
Exactly. Yeah. Parents that had wonderfully down to earth advice in that days.
Yes.
In those days, like, I remember thinking about what I should wear to school. Like especially we normally had to wear our school uniform, but then on certain days we didn't. And I'd be, just fussing around and deciding what to wear. And my mom would go, it's not a fashion show.
Lovely.
So
that's what you need to hear.
Do you have another point that you'd like to?
No, actually, I've said everything I needed to say from the quotes and stuff. Yeah.
Good. Okay. So
you had something.
Yeah. So I've got something really interesting here. So Sri as well separates the silence into two forms here when he's talking about the world. So static silence and dynamic silence. And so static silence is this silence. So he says static silence is found in deep meditation, which is preparation. So this is the thing that people always need to remember, that the spiritual practice is the preparation for living your life. It is not the life itself. And sometimes the spiritual practitioners get too fixated on the practice, and they don't actually go out there and live a life and offer something to the world. And so dynamic silence, this is Sri Chinmoy again, dynamic silence is found in action, which is manifestation. So we need the preparation. We need to do the work so we have something to offer to the world. But then we need to go out into the world in a dynamic way, but coming from that dynamic silence, so that constantly growing and flowing.
I think that reminds me of the concept of flow by Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi.
Good pronounce.
Right?
That you're one of the few people who would even dare to try and pronounce this man's last name.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I made sure that I pronounced it well. But his concept of flow reminds me very much of this idea of dynamic silence.
Yeah.
Where you become one with the activity.
Yeah.
And there's no, like, the mind really doesn't operate anymore on the same level. There's no distractions. There's no unwillingness or like reluctance to do the thing. you're fully committed. And then the sense of time disappears. That's one of the features of this state. Yeah, and when you come out of this activity, you can look at the clock and it's, wow, 2 hours went by.
Yeah, I
And it
think
feels like a minute.
yeah, and that's one of the key experiences of it, is that your experience of time radically changes.
So it radically changed. And I also feel that the quality of the work that you do in
Yeah.
the state is much higher because you're fully there with your presence. We talked so many times about
Yeah.
being fully present, and that is in flow, in a state of dynamic silence. Your full presence is there, and then
Yeah.
it creates quality.
Yeah, because you're not there constantly thinking about things.
Yeah,
You're not there thinking, ruminating about
exactly.
the ghosts of the past, or
Yeah.
fighting the battles of the future.
Yeah.
You're truly present, and you're dealing with the task that's at
Yeah.
hand.
And then I think there's also guidance.
Yeah.
There's guidance there. You kind of know the thing itself tells you how it wants to be done.
Yeah.
In a sense.
Yeah, it sounds, I'm so inspired about silence. I just want to walk out of here and just enter into the space of silence for some time and just really
Which is what we're
experience-
doing this week, because we are both here in New York. We're both here with our community and having a wonderful retreat for
Yeah.
10 days here in Jamaica, Queens.
Yeah.
And
Yes, there's some time for silence and some time for a lot of sound.
yeah, exactly.
So we have both. So continuing on with this one here. The inner silence guides and illumines us. The outer silence reveals and manifests us.
Mm.
So that's key again. We get the guidance and the illumination from the preparation, from sitting in with, communing with silence. And that's what I want people to realize as well. Meditation is not a boring practice. So there's this perhaps idea that it's the absence of thought, it's the absence of distraction. So like, what is there to find there? It's like, you have no idea.
You think the vacuum is nothing? No, it's
Yeah.
full.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is the thing, when you are trying to commune with your own deepest inner silence, it's never going to let you down. It's never going to be like, oh, well, that was a dull one.
Yeah.
Like, is that all I've got? It's like, if you truly believe in the depths, the connection that you have to something transcendent, like, this is the way to find it. This is the way to commune and connect with it and to truly experience it.
It's been said that Albert Einstein found his formula of E is mc squared in like a moment of silence.
Yeah.
It just like came to him. It was not that through reasoning he was getting there. It
Yeah.
just popped out.
Yeah.
And purely by his intuition, he found, okay, that's an interesting concept. E is mc squared.
Yeah.
Then he started calculating, and he then discovered all his proofs, and
Yeah.
was able to prove that statement.
Yeah. And have you heard of Ramanujan?
Yes, I have the.
Yeah.
There's what's the movie? It's
Yeah, there was a nice movie made
The
about that.
Infinite Mind or something like that. Or...
Yeah, so for those who don't know him, he was a young boy who was an Indian mathematician. Perhaps people still say he's perhaps the greatest mathematician that ever lived. And he was doing all of his calculations, first of all, on the floor at a temple in India. And then he was discovered in some way, and he started into correspondence with some professors.
Yeah, he
in
solved
England.
a very long-standing mathematical problem, and he sent that to Cambridge, I think. And then the professor read that, and they were totally dumbstruck.
Yeah,
it was perfect.
And so when he came to England, he had 3 notebooks full of equations that he'd solved. And the thing is, people still are working through those, and we're still, I think, 100 years away from really truly understanding everything that he understood. And the way he would write and understand his equations, he would take huge leaps of intuition. And so for an English-trained mathematician of that time, they could not understand how he knew from this to this to this.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, we can understand from here, but then how do you know this?
Yeah.
And he's like, there's some visionary aspect. There was some intuitive aspect to the way he was experiencing. It was like through that silence, there was access to knowledge. Because in some ways, mathematics is like, it's seeing the unseen. It's seeing the patterns that hold together the structure of reality itself. And so if someone is truly communing with the energy that is underpinning reality, he can easily say, oh, okay, of course, yeah, like it's put together like this. I can see how it all fits together.
Yeah.
And like numbers and mathematics is a representation of something that exists outside of us.
Right.
I'll just finish this one. It was the final part is the role of dynamic silence is to fulfill the will of God in humanity. But what God's will is, we learn only from silence, static silence. So the dynamic silence is how we fulfill the universe in manifestation. But how we get illumined to know what to do is through our practice.
Yeah.
So we need both. Like both need to be intimately connected.
Yes.
Like, so we need to do the practice on a daily basis. So we're illumined and we're guided as to how we should operate in the world. And then when we're in the world, we're using that dynamic silence. We're operating in the world, but not caught up in our own thoughts and our own busyness. And we're present and we're fully capable. And so for me, that's such an inspiring way to look at how I should live my life, because if I look at my life as though that most things are just filler, like we talked about on a recent episode, that if you think of a play, every scene in the play is integral to the play. If it wasn't integral, they wouldn't bother putting it on the stage.
Yeah.
They would cut it out.
Right.
And very often we see so much of our life as filler material. We think, oh, okay, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And then this weekend, something interesting will happen, or tomorrow, or, in a month's time, I'll be able to, go on vacation. And then I can really live my life again.
Yeah.
And that seems such a wrong way to look at life, because life is constantly unfolding right in front of us. And if we can't see the interest and the majesty and the beauty of the moment as it unfolds in front of us, we will constantly fall prey to, imagining castles in the sky and fighting ghosts that we should have long ago buried.
Exactly.
And so this is a model of how you could approach life on a daily basis, where you're doing your practice, you're getting guidance and illumination. And that guidance and illumination does not need to be explicit.
Doesn't need to be super concrete or
Exactly.
like practical.
Yeah, we don't need to know exactly what it's going to look like. It's we have faith that by doing the practice, we're getting the guidance and illumination.
You're getting energy and inspiration.
Yeah.
And from that, you're starting to act.
And then when we go out into the world, it's not falling back into this reactive character state. It's like if we go into the world, but from that place, that foundation of silence, we're not reacting. We're not having our energy, sucked out left, right, and center. We've suddenly got our own. We're a creator instead of a reactor to the world. Yeah. So for me, it's like, wow, like that would make my life worth living. And that does make my life worth living.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I think Sri Chinmoy also talked about how to know the will of God. And he also always answered, go deep within, meditate, and do not allow any thoughts to enter.
Yeah.
He said you can meditate for 10 minutes, but don't allow any thought, good or bad, to enter. And then from within, God's will come to the fore.
Yeah, the inspiration.
Yes, the inspiration.
Yeah, and very often we mistake am I going to get like a very clear message, like an SMS? It'll say, go do this. Turn up at this place at this time, 9:30 tomorrow.
Could be like that maybe once or twice, but no.
But that's the great thing, because to make it more universal, I like to talk about universal consciousness, which, in some ways it's all the same thing. It's the idea of this transcendent consciousness that we're all connected intimately to, but seems to be the creative force of the universe. And it's having faith that this creative force in the universe is our friend, not our enemy.
No, it's not.
Getting that decision, that fundamental decision right.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple more minutes. So I think this is really useful for people to know as well. So I'll talk a little bit about this. This is another idea that I took from Sri Chinmoy. And so he was talking about some people just simply want to do the practice. They just want to meditate. They want to escape from the world. They don't want to deal with the problems of humanity. They don't want to deal with the problems of society. They don't want to deal with
monks and nuns in a monastery.
And so there's this idea of wanting to renounce the world and escape from it. And so Sri Chinmoy said this is selfishness. So this is this idea that the best thing to do, and this is the old idea of Buddhism, the best thing to do is just to get the heck out of here as fast as possible, to escape to nirvana as quickly as possible.
As Sri Aurobindo said, they want to puncture a hole in the fabric of reality. Escape through it.
Yeah, I think, was it pierce a hole?
Oh, pierce a hole.
Yeah, so that's this idea. That's the person who just simply wants to meditate, but doesn't care for their brothers or sisters around them. Because when you truly expand your heart and open yourself to the highest states of consciousness, you start to realize that how could I ever truly be complete when all of my brothers and sisters are not complete? Because in reality, we all are one. The same consciousness that is powering you and driving you forward is the same infinite consciousness that's existing within me. We're all manifestations of this infinite divine creative force. And so if you can't see that connection with your brothers and sisters and with your fellow, beings that exist here on earth, there is something selfish in that. There's something about cutting yourself.
Spiritual selfishness, it is.
Yes. Yeah. exactly.
You have all these fruits, but you don't want to share them. Like you've gone up the tree, you've plucked some of the mangoes, but then
Yeah.
you just want to eat them for yourself.
Yeah. And so, but this is the other side of the problem. Again, there are some who do not want to do the practice, but they think they want to give to the world, but they don't want to do the practice. So Sri Chinmoy said about this is foolishness, because if you do not possess something to give to the world, if you've not done some practice to develop some good qualities, then like, what are you hoping to offer to the world?
Yeah, it's going to be imperfect.
And I very often see that because young people are so wonderfully idealistic, and they have this time in their life where there's this real sort of messiah complex comes about, where they really start to see the world's problems, and they think that they should be the ones to solve them. But they forget that solving problems is incredibly difficult in a complex system. So we live in the most complex system you could ever imagine. And so, like, human, this whole net or mesh of living beings living together on this planet, and all of these different forms and shapes, and all of this complexity of civilization and culture, and the individual versus the group, solving a problem for humanity is incredibly complicated. And so these ideas that people have who have not done the practice, they've not done the work, they've not developed something to offer to the world, but they simply want to be seen to be offering something to the world. It's foolishness, because you need to spend time developing yourself before you have something to offer to the world.
I would say you need to slay some dragons first.
Ooh.
Like, solve the problems in your own nature, slay the dragons that are lurking there, and then you can go out into the world. It's like the story of Lord of the Rings, right?
Yeah.
They go on this big quest, they get rid of the ring,
Yeah.
and then they return to their own village and take care of the problems there.
Yes.
But first, I have this great, personal quest, and they have to go beyond themselves and transcend themselves and conquer difficult problems, and then they can be a force of good for the world.
Yeah, wonderful. So I think that's an important idea, that we want to have that balance, right? We want to do the practice so we have something to offer to the world, but be self-giving, be loving, be kind, and offer those truths, that inspiration you receive. And we will say that the Buddhists, they figured that out second time around,
right,
with the Mahayana,
exactly,
with the idea of the Bodhisattva, who was the one who would continue to be reborn until every last dog was realized.
Yeah, they took it really, really hardcore the second time around.
So that's a beautiful thing, and that shows that there is a humility there and a willingness to transform, which is a beautiful thing to see. And so this is the final thing we're gonna finish on, because this is a really big idea. This is a really big transition.
Fasten your seatbelts.
Fasten your seatbelts. So someone asked Sri Chinmoy, where did the universal heart originate? And so by a universal heart, I take that to be that same universal consciousness that exists within my heart, within your heart, within the heart of all creation. So it's a universal consciousness, but we can call it, this person said the universal heart. So Sri Chinmoy said the universal heart originated in God's silence. When God was absolute silence, inside the silence, something was growing all the time. This was the universal heart. The universal heart came into existence before God's sound life came into existence. And where is the universal heart? It is in deep inside us, where reality constantly grows.
Wow.
So for me, that's really profound, because Sri Chinmoy is talking about a time before the creation. So when we're talking about God's sound life, this is God's creation life. It's like the idea.
We can hear it outside. Like, there's people mowing their lawns, and there's like people
and
their mail, and
like the universe was so peaceful before God created his sound life. And so it's a really interesting thing is the amount of traditions that have this idea that the universe was brought into being with sound. So the Hindu tradition talks about the universe was brought into being by the mantra Om. Yeah. And the universe is constantly being recreated at every moment and sustained through this reverberation of the mantra.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God.
It
was with God.
Exactly. So the biblical tradition says the same thing. The Tibetans, they talk about Hom. And so this is the same thing, another fundamental sound for creation. So there's this idea that the universe was the universe of matter, the things that we see, was brought about by a vibration, a sound, a frequency.
Scientists would say the Big Bang.
But before all of this, there was universal silence. There was infinite silence. Inside that, though, there was not nothingness. And this is a thing that we've got to capture with this. We've captured with this idea of silence and the void. That inside silence, there's potentiality. There's infinite potentiality. Inside of this was growing this infinite consciousness. And where is this infinite consciousness now? It's deep inside each of us. And its nature is to grow. Its nature is to transcend and develop. And so that's why when we're in alignment with our deepest part of ourselves, that we're the right way of manifesting that and living that in the world is the path of self-transcendence. Because inside of us, this infinite potentiality is constantly growing, evolving. The only right way to manifest it in the world is through self-transcendence. So
yeah, it also tells me that there's always hope for the world.
yeah,
Because we have that inside each of us.
Yeah.
It's bound to come to the fore one day.
yeah,
And then illumine the world, hopefully, and
yeah,
we can have a world where silence and sound are perfectly synthesized,
Yeah.
matched.
yeah. I would love for people to start to value silence more.
Yeah,
If they could start to see that there was value in simply being bored, as our
Yes.
elders would have said.
all the great works of humanity, all the great works of art, of music, of thinking were born from silence. And the great scientist discovery.
Yeah,
So maybe that's a good place to end. for
I
today.
think that would be a perfect place to end.
Wonderful. Okay, so we're going to value the silence, and we will hopefully be back next week with a new episode. And if you like our podcast, please consider subscribing, tell a friend, or leave a review. And thank you so much for staying with us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.